Welcome back to Books in Review. I'm your host, Stephen Heiner, and with us, as always, for this series is His Excellency Bishop Donald Sanborn. Hello, Your Excellency.
Hello, Stephen.
So today we're actually doing a book inspired by His Excellency's talking about it in conferences and sermons over the years. That's The Anti-Christian Conspiracy by Msgr Delassus. Shield of Faith is putting this into print in translation over a series of parts. And Your Excellency, this was someone who had heard from you about what a wonderful book it was and what a shame it was that it wasn't translated into English, and they took that up as a challenge.
Yes, I called it a life-changing book because it covers this whole revolt against the Catholic Church, which started with the Reformation and comes right up to our present day. He was writing at the around 1900, more or less, after 1900. And but already a great deal of it had taken place. But it's all, you see the whole Novus Ordo and everything that is happening today, even in civil society, in a nutshell, you might say, or in a seed form in everything that he describes in that book. And so I'm very happy that it's being translated. And translated by somebody who is of French language, and his command of English is extraordinary.
Well, this high praise coming from someone who does read and write in both languages, so we're grateful to have that. Your Excellency, do we know much about Msgr Delassus?
I don't know too much. I just know that he was highly praised and favored by St. Pius X, and I think it was St. Pius X who raised him to the level of domestic prelate.
Well, those are all the credentials I need.
Yes. He was much appreciated by St. Pius X, and he was a Monsignor. That means he wasn't a bishop, but in French, they both get the same title, Monseigneur. And so he was a priest that was raised to that level by Pius X.
I've always appreciated your story in terms of, let's say, ambition within the church, that when someone gets the purple, other people get green or something like this.
Yes, when typically the bishop would name the priests who would be raised technically by the Vatican as what is known as domestic prelates. That means they were part of the papal household. And the story among priests was when they raised some to the purple, all the other priests turned green.
So I don't know what that would have meant in Brooklyn. If you become a Monsignor, do you get an extra day for golf, or
No, it's purely honorary.
You get that extra tassel on your coat of arms.
Well, you get to dress just like a bishop, except you don't have the pectoral cross.
Okay.
And but everything else is the same. At least I don't know what they do now. I mean, now it's all, like gym clothes or something like that. But the in the past, that's what it would be. And and they didn't have the skull cap, so that's how you can tell bishops, So that was Monseigneur Delassus. That's how you pronounce that name.
So as we do in most of these reviews, we're not going to cover the whole book. We're going to talk about, we're going to bring out specific quotes and have His Excellency comment on them. And we'll start with a footnote from de Tocqueville that Monseigneur Delassus put on early on. This explains why religious peoples often accomplish such enduring achievements. It so happened that while dealing with the other world, they had found the key to success in this one. Religions give the general habit to act in view of the future. As such, they are no less useful to happiness in this life than happiness of the other life. This is one of their greatest political aspects. But as the lights of faith are darkening, men's vision becomes narrower, as if every day the object of human actions appears to them as more immediate. And that's an interesting point, Your Excellency, that Christianity gives you the tools not only to reach the afterlife successfully, but to be a good citizen and to be a good contributor in the life that you have.
Yes, it promotes virtue and order, and peace. Peace being the tranquility of order, as Saint Augustine called it. So it more than anything else, it raises people to just even from a purely natural point of view or purely a social point of view to a very, very high level of social order. It has that effect. That's why Napoleon wanted to make peace with the Catholic Church, because he said that a nation without religion is like a ship without a rudder. And even Cicero said that if you don't have religion in a country, then everything falls apart. That's a very, very loose translation, but that was the point of it. He was a pagan, and he said if you don't worship the gods, then you're going to have social troubles. So, and that certainly was true of Rome. So it's Christianity, and by that I mean Roman Catholicism, brings civilization with it, and we saw that in Europe, where the barbarians were transformed into people of high virtue and capable of great works of art and great lawmaking abilities, and there was an observance of natural law and civil law. I mean, yes, people still sinned, etc., but the general order was very, very good.
He continues, once they are used not to take care of what happens after their life, they easily fall back into this complete and brutal indifference towards the future, a tendency which indulges some low instincts of the human species. Once they lose the habit of placing their main hopes in the long term, they are naturally inclined to immediately satisfy their every desire. And it seems that as soon as they lose the hope of living for eternity, they are disposed to act as if their existence was to last only one day.
In short, they become like animals. You take the Catholic faith away from them, and they become like animals. And that's exactly what we have seen today. I mean, people are pagans for the most part, and they live for today. The purpose of life is to enjoy life and then die like a squirrel on the road. So you don't exist anymore. You get taken to the crematorium, they burn you up, and everybody forgets about you. That's life, And so we are both. We have a combination of angel and animal in us. We are a very strange creature in God's array of creatures, because we have both things in us. We have all of the intellect that pertains to a soul, which is like that of an angel. Now, angels are far more advanced than we are, but nonetheless, there is an aspect of the angelic in us, and then there is an aspect of the animal in us. And if the animal takes over, we become brutes by definition, and that's what has happened to modern society.
I don't think His Excellency needs to cite too many examples of how how this has happened.
Worse than animals, because at least animals obey the natural law. Human beings pervert themselves.
I think that's the most diplomatic way you could have put it.
Yes.
Our Lord himself said, and this is not from the footnote now, this is Msgr Delassus. Our Lord himself said, Seek ye therefore first the kingdom of God and his justice, and all these things shall be added unto you. This was not a supernatural promise, but rather the announcement of the consequences that should logically follow from the new orientation given to mankind. And so this idea, Your Excellency, that if we're guided by the supernatural, everything else falls into place. And if we're not guided by the supernatural, everything will... It may take a while if Christendom has been well established, and people can steam along. Mm-hmm. England did for a number of years, steaming on from Catholicism, but after a while, it will fall apart. And then you have women in cassocks and St. Paul's, as we saw.
Yes, it just falls apart. The teaching of the Church on grace is that human beings cannot, for a long time, persevere in all virtue. In other words, in all the virtues. They will eventually fall and commit a mortal sin without grace. They might retain some virtues, typically the virtue of justice, which is the easiest. You pay your bills. You don't shoplift most of the time, and that you can retain that without grace, but you can't retain all the virtues and have a human perfection. That's impossible. So you are going to descend. You're going to sink like a ship without grace. So that's the teaching of the Church concerning the necessity of grace to live in a perfect manner and with all the virtues.
Paganism, pushing mankind towards the path which began with original sin, said to man that he was on earth only to enjoy life and the goods offered by this world. The pagan had no ambition or desire beyond that. Pagan society was designed only to provide these goods in abundance and these refined or gross pleasures to those who were able to claim them. Ancient civilization arose from this principle, and all of its institutions flowed from it, especially the two main ones, slavery and war. For nature was not generous enough, and above all, it was not cultivated long enough and well enough to provide all with these most coveted pleasures. Thus, strong peoples subjugated weak peoples, and citizens enslaved foreigners, or even their own brothers, in order to turn them into wealth producers and instruments of pleasure.
That is the modern world in a the ancient world in a nutshell. You make war on people in order to make them slaves so that you can live more happily, so to speak. That means with more riches and bigger properties, etc. It's like animals. I mean, in the sense that dog eat dog, and if you are something weak, you get enslaved by somebody who's stronger. It's animalistic. 80% of the Roman Empire was slave.
And we're talking towards the end, Your Excellency, as it had taken on all of those different...
Well, gradually it was Christianized toward the end. I mean, I'm talking about in its heyday, you might say, because it was gradually becoming more Christian. But it was 80% slave labor in its heyday. And the owner of slaves had the right to kill all the slaves in his household if one of them had in any way molested one of the members of the family. And then all of them could be killed.
Mm.
And they referred to them as animals that speak. That's how the Romans referred to their slaves. I mean, this is the world.
Well, and it's funny because you originally said, well, this is the modern world, and you said the ancient world, but I thought, well, this sounds pretty familiar.
Yes, it's about the same. At least the ancients had some excuse, though, you might say.
No revelation.
No revelation. But it is an attestation to the truth of the faith that such a world as that I just described could abandon that life and convert to the faith and make the Catholic faith the law of the land by the year 390 under Theodosius. To draw people away from that and to attract them to what Romans would see as a crucified Jew, which is about, for them, was two checks against you as far as the Roman, they always had trouble with the Jews in their empire. And so a crucified Jew is going to become, you have to set aside your Roman gods, all of those things have to go away, and you have to worship this person who was crucified and who was a Jew.
You can hear the contempt in Pilate's voice when he says, "Am I a Jew?" Why would you think that about me?
Yet he was very insistent that Christ was the king. Shall I crucify your king? And then he put the
And what do you think compelled him to speak that way, Your Excellency? Is that just our Lord using him as an instrument to speak truth?
No, I think that he noticed something very, very extraordinary in our Lord and was, in a way, in awe of it, even afraid of it. Just the entire, if you see that interaction in St. John's Gospel, something dazzled Pilate or made him fearful. There was something about our blessed Lord that convinced Pilate that he was a king. And it's very interesting. But our Lord did not, he just said, "Thou sayest that I am a king." And that's all he attested to. And I have come to witness unto the truth, and those who are of the truth hear my voice. That's all he said about that. But that made Pilate very, very hesitant to crucify him, to permit the crucifixion, but because of his weakness and he didn't want to be embarrassed in front of the emperor for a revolt, he finally gave into it. But even after he gave into it, he said, "King of the Jews."
Right, well, he'd had it in that point, right? Quote scripts.
Yes, and then, the Jews said, well, it should say, "I said," or he said that he was King of the Jews. And Pilate said, and I love that, quote, "Scripsi, what I have written," which is such a Roman way of telling them to get lost.
Scram.
Just the Roman way,
Then Christianity came and said to man that he ought to seek in another direction, the happiness, the need of which never ceases to torment him. It overturned the pagan idea of present life. The divine Redeemer taught us through his word, convinced us through his death and resurrection, that if the present life is a life, it is not the life for which his Father destined us. And that brings us to this quote that you have said over and over, in which I feel like I've imbibed it ever before I started reading this text. Enjoy, merit, those are the two words which characterize, separate, and oppose the two civilizations. Man was no longer on earth only to enjoy and die, but to prepare himself for heavenly life and merit it.
Yes, it's something like sitting around at a table and eating as much as you can and getting drunk, or running a race and trying to run as fast as you can in order to achieve the finish line first. It's like two entirely different attitudes. That everything in this life must tend toward that finish line. That's merit. Whereas the idea of enjoy is, eat as much as you can, drink as much as you can, have all the pleasures that you can possibly have, and then just die like an animal. And then you're a success. So it's two worlds. It's two entirely different worlds. Those who run in the Olympics, they fast, they abstain from certain things in order to run faster, and or to do whatever sport they're doing.
It isn't something we hear from St. Paul. I think it's a very useful way of thinking about things. This is competition and depriving yourself, and you've got to compete. Except in this race, everyone can win if you conform yourself. There doesn't only have to be one winner. Everyone can
be a winner. That's right. I remember sitting in an Italian restaurant. Well, it was Italy, so it's Italian. It was in Rome, and this noted soccer player came in because the restaurant was buzzing.
His Excellency didn't have any idea who this was.
I had no idea who he was, and I didn't care. But he couldn't eat certain things. They knew that he couldn't eat, so they gave him just fish and no potatoes. And I saw the whole thing happening. And I thought, well, that's very interesting, because they wanted to preserve him for the soccer game, which is like the religion in Italy. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but for many Italians, that is more important than the Catholic faith. Let's put it that way. Yes, many, not all, but many. So that's that. But he was fasting, for a goal that is going to be forgotten by the world forever. Fasting for that, whereas if you were to say to a worldling you have to fast or you have to give up certain pleasures, well, it's just like a death sentence. Might as well just die.
And it's funny because people who do understand our world is very enthralled by sports. They understand that. No one ever says, well, that's a crazy idea. Why would you fast? Why would you watch certain foods? But it is a crazy idea to do that for the supernatural, for a life to come, because they don't believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
As the new conception of life brought to earth by our Lord Jesus Christ entered into minds and hearts, society changed. The new point of view changed the morals, and under the pressure of ideas and morals, institutions were transformed. Slavery disappeared, and the powerful, instead of oppressing their brothers, devoted themselves even heroically to providing them with the bread of present life, and also and above all to providing them with the bread of spiritual life, to elevate their souls and sanctify them. War was no longer made to take someone else's territory and reduce men and women into slavery, but to break the obstacles to extension of the kingdom of Christ and to provide slaves of the demon with the freedom of the children of God. This process takes a long time, Your Excellency. We live in a period past Christendom, but prior to Christendom's rise, it wasn't enough. So a lot of times the French will point to Clovis and say, yes, that's when we converted to Christianity and we were the first Christian nation. But it wasn't as if it was Clovis's baptizer who was a saint, his wife who was a saint, but it wasn't Saint Clovis. And it took a while for all of the tendencies to be pushed out of the French character to elevate them into this great force for good in the world.
Yes, for example, the successors of Clovis, the Merovingians, were noted for their violence. If you were an enemy, they would just kill you, and as like personal enemy or any kind of somebody in your way, you would just knock him off. The Merovingians were noted for that. Even Charlemagne had a tendency to be brutal in certain cases. And even St. Louis, who was 13th century, he wanted to cut out the tongues of blasphemers, and the Pope said, no, that's too much, don't do that. But the Middle Ages was characterized by a certain, you might say, leftover of the barbarian world. And being brutal was not considered as horrible as it is now. You have to understand that about the Middle Ages. I mean, it was just something. I often tell the story of the Germans before they were converted. If the husband died, then they would kill the wife and the dogs and burn them all up in a pyre, funeral pyre. That was life for the barbarian hordes. And so it took a while for that to be worked out of them. It took a while, for example, to work the barbaric games in the Colosseum. Those did not disappear. The gladiatorial games,
Right, St. Augustine writes about this in the Confessions.
They continued up to about 550 A.D. Finally, they were suppressed by that time. Because the Romans, it takes a long time to work these things out of people. If there were a conversion of the whole world tomorrow to Catholicism, it would take a long, long time to work out all of the modern ideas and the sick, weird things that people believe in today. It would take a long, long time to work those things completely out. So sometimes people look at the Middle Ages and say, oh, that was terrible, heretics getting burned and whatnot. That was considered normal at the time, whereas they would be horrified, absolutely horrified to see what we do and what we think. I mean, they would just gasp and say, how could any civilization call itself civilization when you're doing what you're doing? You see? Warfare in the Middle Ages was far more civilized than it is now. Far more civilized.
Well, there's certain times that you couldn't engage in war.
During lunch, for example, you would not attack your enemy during lunch. You would not attack on a Sunday or a holy day of obligation. And also, if you got close enough to your enemy to tag him, your enemy had to give up. That was in the Middle Ages. Joan of Arc was tagged, and she had to give up by the rules of warfare. You see. And so it was actually much more civilized than it is now. I mean, imagine that, telling somebody if you get tagged, you have to give up. So, every age is different, and you just have to understand that about history.
Yeah, I think the closest I would try to imagine is on public executions, Your Excellency, that was something that was a spectacle. People would go to those, but it was also a salutary warning that there was any little scamp who was watching that. He thought, well, that could be me if I decide I'm going to keep being a pickpocket.
Absolutely. There was, and there were very swift punishments. There was sitting around on
multiple appeal
or for 20 years or something like that. No, you were pretty much gone by that afternoon if you were arrested in the morning. St. Francis Borgia did that. He had, when he was a nobleman in Spain, he would go out with like a posse, you might say a posse, and round up all the thieves and, people that would attack people on the highways. That was a big problem. Take them back into town and hang them all. That was just common, this is what happens to you if you do that.
Don't be bad if that won't happen to you. You mentioned St. Louis, and I was thinking about this. What else was said in the quote was, providing our more unfortunate brothers, and St. Louis would wait on the unfortunates. And that's when was the last time we would see a prime minister or a president do that, not for a photo op, but to do that as a regular thing? Let's say, every Tuesday they would go do that.
He did it incognito. He would go into hospitals and be, empty bedpans. I assume they had those, something like that. But, taking care of very, very menial job
or worse, yeah,
in the hospitals, and nobody would know who he was. That was St. Louis, the King of France. Yeah, no, he was a great saint. And France needs another St. Louis right now.
And I think the last point I want to speak about too, Your Excellency, is the condition of women, in that women could just be thrown away, divorced, etc. And it was the church who said, no, you can't do that. We're not going to permit that. We're not going to gloss it over just because you're the king. And it took centuries to get that. And the Reformation started to push all of that back.
Yes.
And part of what we see today with the problems with men and women is a pushback against what the church was able to do, to ennoble women and to make them equals.
Yes. The condition of women was raised a great deal by Christianity from what it was in the Roman Empire.
To facilitate and promote liberty of men and peoples in their efforts towards good, such became the goal of social institutions, their expressly determined end. And souls aspired to heaven and worked to merit it. The pursuit of earthly goods in order to enjoy them was no longer the only or even the main object of the actions of Christians, at least those who were truly imbued with the spirit of Christianity. But the pursuit of spiritual goods, the sanctification of the soul, the growth of virtues, which are the true ornaments and delights of this life, as well as the guarantees of everlasting life. Whenever I read parts of the liturgical year, you'll see I marvel at the ability of very simple peoples to keep vigils, attend matins regularly, and these are things most of us have never experienced in our lifetimes for various reasons. But this was not even a question for them. Well, of course we're going to go to matins. Of course we're going to do this. And you said on more than one instance about how that would even play into Sunday, that you would attend Mass, you'd maybe attend another Mass, you'd go back for Vespers.
It was obligation to attend 2 Masses on Sunday until the 1600s. Urban VIII did away with it.
Wow.
Yes, you had to go to the first Mass, which was a low Mass, and if you were receiving communion, you would communicate at that Mass, go home and have breakfast, and come back for the high Mass when there was no distribution of communion.
Wow.
Yes, that was up until the 1630s.
And was this customary throughout Europe?
It was the law. It was the law.
It was the law.
Yes.
Okay.
That was true on holy days, too, and there are many, many holy days, many more than we have now. And that was changed by Urban VIII in the 1630s.
The virtues acquired through personal efforts were transmitted through education from one generation to another. Hence was gradually formed the new social hierarchy, no longer based on strength and abuse, but on merit. At the bottom, the families who were content with the virtue of work. In the middle, those who, knowing how to combine work with moderation in the use of the goods obtained by it, founded property through their savings. At the top, those who, breaking free from selfishness, reached the sublime virtues of dedication to others. Common people, bourgeoisie, aristocracy. Society was based and families were ranked according to the ascending merit of virtues, transmitted from generation to generation. And now we have class warfare, Your Excellency.
Yes, yeah. The idea of the nobility in the Middle Ages and after was virtue, is that they would be the standard of virtue. Now, eventually, that declined. Then they were, and that's one of the things that brought about the French Revolution, is that the nobility were on the whole, not all, but on the whole, corrupt and not virtuous. And they lost their reason for being too, because the ancient or the medieval reason for being of the nobility was that they had some money and they could afford the horses and all of the armor, and they were obliged to respond to the king when he had to go to war, whereas the common people did not. You see, they ran the farms, and so that was the original idea. And it was all virtue, the knights and all. There was a quasi sacred thing, and but then that deteriorated, and people got disgusted with them, unfortunately. But that was all part of the modern world. That was not the original idea. And also the nobility preserved and fostered culture. Western culture is the effect of the nobility. They had money and they had good taste. And they hired these great artists and great musicians, etc., to produce what we enjoy today. And one of the reasons why music is at such a low level today is because that class is gone.
Mm. It might be useful too, Your Excellency, to talk about the corruption of the best is the worst. What does this mean in relation to the loss of our nobility?
Yes, well, I mean, let's put it this way: if you have a $500 bottle of wine and you leave it out without a cork on it, you're going to weep and cry when you find that it has turned to vinegar. So the corruption of the best is the worst. If you have a $10 bottle of wine and you leave it out, you will figure, well, too bad. But so yes, there is the when something is very, very noble and high, and if it goes bad, then it's something that is very much lamented.
Such was the work of the Middle Ages. In this time the Church fulfilled a threefold task. She fought against the evil coming from the various sects of paganism and destroyed it. She transformed the good elements found among the ancient Romans and the various barbaric races. Finally, she gave triumph to the idea of true civilization, which our Lord Jesus Christ had given. To achieve that, she first focused on reforming the heart of man. From that came the reform of family, and family reformed the state and the society, an opposite path to the one that we want to follow today.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about this before, Your Excellency. Religion forms the culture, culture forms politics, and today people forgot about religion, forgot about culture, and they're entirely focused on politics as the end.
Yes.
But that's only because they've detached it from...
Yeah, they have missed the essential goal, and so everything else becomes meaningless in a way.
Here, Msgr Delassus quotes Lamartine. Any civilization which does not proceed from the idea of God is false. Any civilization which does not lead to the idea of God is short. Any civilization which is not penetrated by the idea of God is cold and void. The final expression of a perfect civilization is God better seen, better adored, better served by men. It sounds very rigid and hateful.
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, even the great Roman temples and Greek temples are all done for the gods. I mean, there is just a natural alliance between beauty, order, and religion. Even in look at in India and the places like Thailand and all those are temples to gods. I mean, in the sense they're false gods, but nonetheless there is an idea that the best must be given, and the most beautiful must be constructed.
Well, and we're recording this after the recent rededication of we would say Notre Dame in America, Notre Dame in France, and the spectacle of the apparently lay, indifferent to religion head of the French state attending the rededication of this church. What's going on here?
He was the one that was laughing when it was burning down. Yeah, it's all absurd. I mean, but Notre Dame for the French is, the average paganized Frenchman today is just a symbol of their nation in a way. It's something like the tricolor or the Eiffel Tower. Paris could not do without Notre Dame. I mean, it's just something that had to be fixed. You couldn't leave that in ruins. Say that would be like leaving France in ruins. And their freeways, their highways are measured from Notre Dame. Right? Yeah. So, for only that, it had to exist.
Msgr Delassus also quotes Emile Malle from his text Religious Art in the 13th Century and Religious Art at the Close of the Middle Ages. We have to admit that the principle of art in the Middle Ages was in complete opposition against the principle of art in the Renaissance. The closing Middle Ages had emphasized the humble aspects of the soul: suffering, sadness, resignation, acceptance of divine will. The saints, the Virgin Mary, Christ himself, often depicted in a certain state of weakness, in likeness of the poor people of the 14th century, had no brightness other than the one which comes from the soul. This art is profoundly humble. The true spirit of Christianity dwells in it. The art of the Renaissance is entirely different. Its hidden principle is pride. From now on, man is self-sufficient and aspires to become a god. The highest expression of art is the unveiled human body. The idea of a fall and a decline of mankind, which turned artists away from nudity for a long time, is no longer present to their minds. The overall ideal of 15th century Italy was to turn man into a hero, radiant with strength and beauty, unbothered by his earthly condition, ignoring pain, compassion, or resignation.
That's exactly accurate. The only time you saw nudity in medieval art was Adam and Eve, and it was not portrayed in any kind of how would you say,
Lascivious.
lascivious manner. I mean, you just knew that they didn't have clothes on, but no attention to the body. But then you get into the Renaissance, and everything is. You get women with biceps, like Michelangelo with the ladies with biceps, and with no clothes on, and various others where all of a sudden they have no clothes. Why not? And don't forget, we have clothing because of original sin. Human beings were not embarrassed to be naked before original sin, but because they lost their control over themselves by the preternatural gifts, they lost those preternatural gifts. They lost control, so then they felt an attraction that they had no control over, and that's why there was embarrassment, and so that's why we have clothes, and and that's a sign of fallen man, and then obviously man in need of redemption, the fact that he is clothed. Whereas if you just say man as man, man without original sin and perfect man, and he's going to be the God man, which was the original suggestion of the devil, then yes, you have Renaissance art. And I mean, there's some very fine paintings in Renaissance art, but it's just that you see exactly what that man is saying, that Émile Malle, who was a great authority on medieval art. Another thing I noticed, too, is that come the Renaissance, the building of churches, to a certain extent, goes down, and the building of homes goes up. You visit the Chateau of the Loire Valley, and they're all Renaissance. There's one or two that might be slightly medieval, but they're all Renaissance, splendorous homes. You go to England, and you see, of course, the medieval cathedrals, which are magnificent. But then, as the Renaissance comes, it's the big homes, you see, and look at this huge home. It's 100,000 square feet, and that's what you are. And the same thing is true in Holland and all of those other countries where the religious art and the building of cathedrals, which is a very, very significant act, is downplayed, and the human life,
tile work in the Netherlands, this sort of attention that they paid, it all went away from religion, and
yes, and then it went into just day-to-day life and a nice home in Amsterdam, and so it was especially true in Protestant countries, but it also infected Catholic countries. It was
because they traded with some of these Protestant countries, and some of those ideas came back, unfortunately.
And if you look in medieval towns where the cathedral's in the middle, the homes surrounding it are not very sumptuous. That's the center of town. You think it would be, no, they're not very sumptuous. They are quite ordinary, and you could see all the attention was on that building, that cathedral, as
you say that, I'm thinking now around Notre Dame, around San Marco in Venice, or in Florence around the Duomo. None of those houses in those piazzas or those spaces are extraordinary.
There's no palazzi or anything like that, no. That all came in the Renaissance, the Versailles and all of those things. And you walk through Versailles, as impressive as it is, except for the chapel, there's not a single sacred thing in it. To the contrary, there's some things that should be taken down, So, but it's all the exaltation of Louis XIV as the new Apollo and all of this stuff. I mean, it's sickening to look at. I mean, it's very beautifully done. It's a very impressive place, but it is a kind of a sickening building in that sense. You could see a sick society.
And I suppose one way that this could be characterized, Darcy, I'm thinking of the skyline of Florence, and you see that Medici Palace also rises up, and it somewhat rivals the Duomo, that this wouldn't have been a priority prior to the Renaissance, that I need to show that I am also important, as important as the Duomo.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. That was a big thing in Italy, how tall your tower was.
Right.
There's a town in Italy that has something like 5 towers, and each family was vying for the highest tower.
What a surprise.
San Gimignano, I think it is. San Gimignano.
We just talking about art, and the idea of what a big leap we come, and the two that are in my mind on this is the Annunciation by Fra Angelico, in which we see this emphasis on the action and on the peoples involved. What is Our Lady's position? How is the angel oriented towards her? And what contrasts for me quite strongly with this is Leonardo da Vinci's John the Baptist. And the way that he's looking at the viewer, if you're looking at him, it's such a, reading this quote, this idea, its hidden principle is pride. There is no hiding this principle. The John the Baptist of Leonardo da Vinci that's looking at us, he's quite young and prideful. There's nothing humble in his appearance. Or we have Our Lady, this Madonna of the Rocks. What is Our Lady doing in this desolate place?
Right.
That some of the Renaissance art, yes, as you say, the technique is unbelievable, but what is this place?
Yes, it is dragging all of that Renaissance attitude into religion. And yes, those John the Baptists were really just they did not portray him at all as an ascetic and as a hermit, as someone whose appearance would shock us because he was meant to draw us away from this life. And he, as I said, it would have been shocking to look at. Who is this person? And the hair,
wearing skins,
skins, and very, very thin. You don't get fat on locusts. There's not a lot of fat there or sugar. Yes, he would have been shocking to the people coming out from Jerusalem, who were probably well heeled. And that was the precise reason for that. In other words, to shock people into what they needed to do to repent for their sins. And so, no, it was just a vehicle of showing man again as man, without a redeemer, without necessity of redemption, man in his complete human nature that is perfect. And so you do John the Baptist and you throw some underwear on him or something like that, and then that's the end of it.
Well, and I think it's made it harder for me to appreciate some of these works. When I remember you told me some years ago that some of these models for Our Lady were really just mistresses, and I thought, well,
they were Raphael's girlfriends.
Girlfriends is a very sort of mild way of putting it in your ecstasy, and then my appreciation for that work is lessened now, knowing that this is the vehicle he was using for that.
Yeah, they are portraits of nice Italian girls, nice looking Italian girls, that with a baby. I mean, if you just said this is Maria Bacigalup, and this is her baby, it would be probably the same. Just some nice Italian girl next door, and nothing supernatural about her. Whereas the medieval art, it's like Fra Angelico. I mean, you just are, or iconic art, the icons of the Greeks. Right away, the supernatural aspect of Our Lady is clear. See, but these other Madonnas in the Renaissance, not all, some are not too bad, but there was that idea of painting a nice Italian girl.
But for us moderns, when we look at that iconic art, Our Lord looks angry or Our Lady looks harsh. And that's our sensibility, I think, starting with the Renaissance, is it has to look pleasant to the eye.
Right.
Not instead looking at, well, what is this speaking to? Where is their joy? Where is their expression coming from? It's not.
It's all sensuality.
Mm. Now, the problem, as you've alluded to, is unfortunately the church starts to be affected by some of this. The popes were therefore brought, by all sorts of providential circumstances, to call to their side scholars representative of the new literary and artistic movement they were witnessing. They made it their honor and duty. They gave purchases, pensions, and dignities to those who elevated themselves above the others by their talents. Unfortunately, in pursuing their goal, they did not care enough about the quality of the people they were encouraging in this way.
Yeah, there's some some of the Renaissance, 1400s, so 15th century popes were very much in favor of the movement of the Renaissance, especially Sixtus IV, who reigned in 1470s around there. And something that if you go to the Vatican Museum, you'll see the bronze cover of his tomb. And not that he's buried there, but they took it because that is known as the Renaissance Manifesto. And I stared at that thing for a long, long time, and there was not a single sacred image on that big bronze plate.
Really?
It's probably 6 feet by 10 feet easily. this magnificent thing. You can probably see it on the internet.
And it was going to be the cover for his coffin?
Yes, or something for his tomb.
Okay.
But it was removed from that, and because it was such a work of art. Not a single sacred thing on that tomb. And he's responsible for the Sistine Chapel.
Which you're no fan of.
Well, yes, but Julius II was the one responsible for and he was no prize, for the ceiling. And then someone else late in life, it must have been probably Paul III, who had Michelangelo do the Last Judgment. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Pius V had the clothing put on the figures on the Last Judgment. So, no, I'm not a fan of any of that.
Day 3 of His Excellency's pontificate would be the whitewashing, I think, of the ceiling.
Got a roller. So that will guarantee that no one will ever elect me the Pope.
In all matters, there was therefore a divorce between the tendencies of the Renaissance and the traditions of Christianity. While the Church kept preaching the fall of man, affirming his weakness and the necessity of a divine help for the accomplishment of one's duty, humanism anticipated Jean-Jacques Rousseau in proclaiming the goodness of nature. It deified man. While the Church assigned to human life a supernatural meaning and goal, putting in God the end of our destiny, paganized humanism limited the ideal of life to this world and to man itself.
Yeah, it all blossomed, and I use that word very, it's not it all became, it matured, let's say, in the 18th century. All of those philosophers in both England and France primarily wanted to create a civilization of reason. They hated the Catholic Church. They hated it, and it had to be destroyed as far as they were concerned. And man can live by reason. And this got into the American way of thinking. Thomas Jefferson and various other founding fathers were imbued with these ideas that you don't need religion in society, that's a private thing, and you shouldn't persecute it necessarily, but it shouldn't enter into society. That was very common in the thinking of the founding fathers. And so that's one of the reasons why we have so many problems that we have today. Because how do you make laws concerning morality? A law has to promote the good. How do you do that without religion? Without some commandments? What do you do? Who decides? Some congressman or some judge, or who decides these things? You see, it's a ship without a rudder. You see, and that's why we have the problems that we do in this country, and that's why Europe has its problems too. It's a ship without a rudder, and but that was all invented and promoted in the 18th century by Rousseau, by Voltaire, and various other horrid creatures. And it was put into social and political practice by the French Revolution. And Napoleon scattered that revolution all over Europe. And so Europe was all converted to this new idea by 1814, when he finally, or 1815, when he finally had his Waterloo, as we say. But Europe was all stained and infected by it.
I think you've used another term, Your Excellency, when you talk about the scattering. It was a scattering of manure, shall we say?
Yes, he was the manure spreader of the French Revolution. We had one of those at Écon, I remember, every spring. This fellow would come, there were vineyards around Écon, and he would use them on a hot day. Well, you couldn't breathe practically.
Right.
And so that's Napoleon. He was the manure spreader of the French Revolution ideas and all of these very anti-Catholic and diabolical ideas of the 18th century that were very, very prevalent in France. And and then but England too was, the English exported it here, and this country has become, this tremendous, wealthy and powerful country, and so it has influence as well. But England exported it all over her empire. And France exported it to Europe. And so that's why we have what we have today.
Right. Monsignor Delassus alludes to that. The twists and turns of this long drama holds the breath of heaven, earth, and hell For if France finally rejects the revolutionary venom, she will restore in the whole world the Christian civilization she was the first to understand, adopt, and propagate. If she succumbs, the world has everything to fear. It's all in the French, Your Excellency.
Well, it's to a certain extent. I mean,
he's writing for the French as a French.
Yes, well, the French, of course, would love to hear that. But it is true that France was the first Christian nation among the barbarians. That is true. And they are responsible for at least a great deal of, if not most of, what you would call Catholic civilization. I would say that about them. They have, even to this day, an enormous cultural influence. If something is, made in Germany, that's very nice.
Reliable.
But if it's from France,
you can mark it up 30%.
Yes, I mean, it's French. I mean, they have a certain aura about them that influences other nations. And they did, even in the Renaissance, the Baroque period, everybody wanted a palace like the French. France was the most powerful country and the most influential country up to, I'm going to say, 19th century. You see, then it started to go down after Napoleon as far as its ability to influence, but still, and to this day it holds that so it is capable, and the French are people that will be extreme about whatever they do or think. And when I say extreme, that I don't mean that negatively, but they will not be of half measures. If they are revolutionaries, they will be extreme revolutionaries. If they are Catholics, they will be extreme Catholics in the good sense. In other words, they will bring it to its logical conclusions.
And down the street from Notre Dame, you have the Pompidou Center.
Yes. But I lived among them for a number of years, and I just know them, and that's the way they are. They will, if they, it would go by God's grace, if France is converted one day, yes, they will bring Catholicism to the rest of the world. I would say that.
And lest our French watchers and listeners get puffed up, remember that it has to be done through prayer and penance. Some evil is only driven out in this way. The German and Protestant historian Ranke tells us what its great means of seduction, license, which Renaissance had glorified, tells us what was its great means of seduction. Many people embraced the Reformation, he says, with hope that it would give them a greater freedom in their private conduct. There is indeed between Catholicism and Protestantism, as preached by Luther, a radical difference in this regard. Catholicism promises future rewards to virtue and threatens vice with eternal punishments, therein strongly restraining human passions. Reformation, on the other hand, promises heaven to all men, even the most criminal, under the sole condition of an interior act of faith to one's personal justification by the imputation of the merits of Christ. If solely by the effect of this persuasion, which is easy to obtain, men are certainly going to heaven, in spite of them continuing to indulge in sin, or even in crime, one would be a fool not to seek on this earth everything he finds within one's reach.
Yes. If that's all there is,
I'm saved.
Then become a pagan. If that's all there is.
No more ember days.
No, and enslave whomever you can, and abuse whomever you want to abuse. There's no accounting for it.
Defraud your workers.
Right. Yes.
Something that you said before, Your Excellency, about the Sisters of St. Thomas Aquinas is one of the things that's easy about their job is they can show up in their habit and sing, and then money comes out.
Yes.
And I think Msgr Delassus anticipates this in this phrase. It is the mere presence of the religious in the middle of the Christian people as a continuous preaching which allows them not to lose sight of the last end of man, the principal goal of society, and the character which true civilization must have. Wearing a specific habit which marks who they are and what they are seeking in this world, they say to crowds in the middle of which they circulate that we were all made for heaven and we have to strive for it. To this silent preaching is added the preaching of their works, selfless works which do not call for a retribution here below, which affirm through this selflessness that there is a better reward that all should aspire to. Finally, their teaching in the schools and from the pulpit never ceases to sow in the souls of children, to grow in the souls of adults, to propagate in all directions the faith in eternal goods. Nothing is more directly and more effectively opposed to the restoration of the pagan social order. Nothing which the resurrection of this order projected, wanted, and pursued since 4 centuries demands a quicker disappearance.
Yes, the cassock, or the religious habit even more so, it is a message. The way you dress is always a message. It always gives us signals. But what he says there is absolutely true, that it is the presence of the next world in this world, and the message that you must order your lives according to the next world and not this world. And that's why the Freemasonic and anti-Catholic governments of the 19th century in Europe banned clerical attire.
They couldn't stand to see it.
No, and they got rid of the religious orders. France kicked out the religious orders in the latter part of the 19th century. Of course, they persecuted the priests and nuns during the French Revolution in an absolutely horrible manner. They had to get rid of that signage, you might say. That's to this day, the laws of 1904 in France, which prohibited wearing the cassock or wearing any kind of religious attire, are still on the books. It's just in France,
tolerance.
It's they say officieux, in the sense that things sort of, it's not the same as Anglo-Saxon law. The law is the law, but it's softer with time and all. And I noticed that about France.
To put an end to it, the Monde Maçonnique in the issues of January and May stated this: Freemasonry teaches us that there is only one religion, a true one, and consequently the only natural one, the worship of mankind. Because, my brothers, this abstraction which built into a system served as the basis of all religions, God, is nothing but the whole of our most elevated instincts, to which we have given a body, a distinct existence. This God, finally, is nothing but a generous yet erroneous conception of humanity, who debased herself for the sake of an illusion.
Yeah, that's the culmination of all of the 18th century thinking, really Renaissance thinking. Yes, the humanity is God. I think Karl Marx said that. It's something to that effect. And I think the publication of the Freemasons in France is called Humanité. I think that's the name of it. But yeah, that's so they are an organization that embodies all of that thought and all of that idea, and that's why they have successfully banned religion in general from society, especially after 1914. There was a few holdouts, such as Russia and even Turkey. I mean, they had a religion that was established. The German Empire, Austria. Those had established religions, and they all fell as a result of World War I. And so the Treaty of Versailles, Wilson said something to this effect, that Christianity has failed to unite the world, so now we have to do it. I'm paraphrasing again. I don't have that quote in front of me, but he had some very horrible ideas, Wilson. He was just the scum of the earth. That's the only way I could put Woodrow Wilson. Just horrible person.
Because that's what he's in diplomatic phrase.
Yes.
Diplomatically, the scum of the earth.
Yes.
So ending on this note with this hatred, and this will set us up for the next volume in this series, which will be out, I want to say, at the end of February in 2025. This is in 1865. In this same Congress of Liège, Lafargue asked, "What is the revolution?" and then answered, "The revolution is the triumph of work over capital, the triumph of the worker over the parasite, of man over God. Such is the social revolution contained in the principles of 1789, the human rights taken to their ultimate expression." He also said, "For 400 years we have been undermining Catholicism, the strongest engine ever invented in matters of spiritualism. Unfortunately, it is still strong." Then, in the last session, he uttered these hellish screams: "War to God, hatred to God, progress is here, heavens must be burst like a paper vault."
Yeah, that's a very accurate description of their attitude. And in order to understand the Novus Ordo, you have to understand that all of this attitude has penetrated the walls, you might say, of the Catholic Church, in the sense that the inmates, the modernist inmates of the Vatican and the modernist inmates of chancery offices, etc., are all infected with these ideas, perhaps not as radically as that, but nonetheless infected with the idea of the deification of man, making the world a better place in which to live. You see, that is the constant theme of Bergoglio. Climate or this or that, and the
unemployment, loneliness of old people.
Yes, migrants, and eliminating the walls of dogma. In other words, taking down all of the barriers of dogma. That's why he said in Indonesia, all religions are a path to God. Everybody was shocked and gasped at that. That was said by John Paul II in 1980 in his encyclical, that the children have to be taught that other religions are a means of salvation. And it's said in Vatican II, the Spirit of God does not hesitate to use these non-Catholic religions as a means of salvation. So it's nothing new, but you see, that absolutely eliminates the purpose of the Catholic Church and transforms the Catholic Church into merely a humanity church. In other words, it's a Freemasonic humanity church. That's all it is, and he has lately, the Christ child with a Palestinian scarf, lying on a Palestinian scarf. Now, whatever you want to say about the Palestinians and the Israelis, that is not the place to make a statement like that. It is, our blessed Lord in a crib and the Redeemer, and, but everything is worldly. You see, it's some sort of worldly statement. And so, no, he's on a path, but people object to him. Oh, if we could only have Benedict, only have John Paul II again. It is a stream, just as a stream came out of the 18th century and made gradual increments through the 19th century and the 20th century. So also Vatican II was the source of all of this. And now we're just seeing the Niagara Falls of it, if you might say. In other words, the outpouring of all of this rot, this modernist rot. And they all contributed to it from John the 23rd on through, all of them. And they just knew their limitations. That's all. And Bergoglio doesn't care about the limitations.
Well, if you've enjoyed what His Excellency had to say about the book, a part of what Shield of Faith is proposing as it works through these various translations is a Q&A session with any buyers of the text with His Excellency to also be a contribution to the seminary. So that's one way you can support the work of the seminary. There's always the donate button in the description of the video. So if you do buy it and you buy it before the Q&A session, you'll have access to ask His Excellency questions about the text that you've had a chance to read. And if you buy it after the Q&A session, you'll have access to the recording of that. I look forward to continuing to work through these different parts, Your Excellency, and having insight into what you've said is a life-changing book. And I've only had a chance to read a small fraction of this life-changing book, and it's already given me some wonderful ideas.
Has your life changed already?
I would say part of it has already been changing because you've used some of these quotes before, but it's been wonderful to see it expressed. And he does so he doesn't use technical language. It's not complicated. It's very straightforward and simple.
Yes, it's I recommend it to everybody.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Your Excellency.
Thank you.